the questions feature in the right column. We'll have an opportunity to answer these questions at the end of our presentation. And today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the UEDA website within the next week or so. Now, established in 1976, the University Economic Development Association is North America's membership association that brings together public and private higher education, the private sector, public agencies, and community economic development stakeholders together in economic development. UEDA's members work to expand economic opportunity and prosperity within our communities and regions by leveraging education, talent development, research, technology development, and community building and placemaking strategies. Our members include institutions of higher education, economic developers, and the for-profit sector, all of who are working to improve the competitiveness of our regions. Through news and information, public policy, educational programming, and best practice sharing, UEDA works to expand our opportunities within our communities by leveraging research, community and campus planning, talent development, and technology commercialization. Now, the association is driving some exciting new initiatives, and I'd just like to share just a few of those with you before we begin our presentation today. So first, we have the Foundations for Strategy and Practice, which we affectionately call the Foundations. It is about the roles of institutions of higher education in economic development and engagement with their constituencies. Produced in support of higher education institutions, and this was created by UEDA and the Association for Public Land Grant Universities, APLU. This foundation's publication is meant to inspire institutions to reinvent the relevant college or university for the 21st century, as well as to think more comprehensively about how economic development and engagement activities connect to each other and to an institution's core mission activities. You can find more about our foundation's work at our website, and you can search for that just based on the URL foundations.universityeda.org. Now, in conjunction with this effort, we will also be launching a journal of economic development in higher education within the next month or so. We've also invested in a CRM system, which is helping us build the infrastructure and an actual foundation ourselves for our association to begin more engagement with our institutions and our members. We have some great ideas in store for this tool, and it will enhance our member engagement and drive collaboration amongst members. And lastly, we have a major effort underway to grow and diversify our membership base to further our mission and advance the knowledge and practice and economic engagement by all institutions of higher education. So for more information, including information about how to join UEDA, as I know that there's a number of non-members here with us today, please visit our website, and that's universityeda.org. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter today, John Pyrovalakis. John is the founder of Innovation Accelerator. The Innovation Accelerator developed a new innovation model that was credited in the 2012 PCAST report for attracting $20 million into a portfolio of SBIR grantees. Innovation Accelerator worked on the government's behalf in this effort. Subsequently, John founded the Innovation Accelerator Foundation, whose mission is to promote American competitiveness in the global economy by promoting American innovation, with a particular focus on maximizing the economic impact of research and development, including intellectual property, out of universities and federal research labs. The Innovation Accelerator Foundation is home to iBridge, the world's largest university intellectual property marketplace, with over 170 participating universities and 18,000 innovations. John is a graduate of New York University with a triple major in mathematics, philosophy, and computer science. He proceeded to the doctoral program on teaching fellowship and scholarship at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, with a focus on mathematical logic. Now, as I bring John and share the screen with him and ask John to begin the presentation, I would also like to take the opportunity to thank John and the Innovation Accelerator Foundation to sponsoring UEDA. We've developed a great relationship with the Innovation Accelerator Foundation as well as the iBridge Network, and we really thank John and Innovation Accelerator for that partnership. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you John Pyrovalakis. And I think he is muted here. So let's unmute John. You there, John?
I am.
Great.
Am I coming through?
You're coming through.
Okay. Great. Well, Tim, thank you for the nice introduction. One quick, and this is my mistake, not yours, Tim, but just one point of clarification is that the PCAST report that cited our work actually credited us with bringing in $200 million into the portfolio of small businesses that we manage on the government's behalf. So order of magnitude better. And just a little bit of history is that I'll give before we get going is that many of you might know of iBridge Network already because it was started by the Kauffman Foundation in 2007. We took it over about 3 years ago, really with a mandate to redo the technology, which we were hearing was not in good shape. And we did unofficially release a new website. And the other thing we did is we think we were developing better relationships with the universities, that there was some tension with Kauffman at the tail end of their tenure with iBridge Network. But it was just a little bit by ways of background, and I may have met some of you, or some of you might have had the fortune or misfortune of hearing me talk about similar subjects at the previous UEDA event. But with that, I'll start. And I'll be making the case for a national and virtual university ecosystem. And just in terms of what that means, I think all of us, the term innovation ecosystem is certainly almost hackneyed at this point, and we have the great ones around Stanford and MIT and so forth. And the case that I'm making is that it's important, actually, for our country that we extend the siloed innovation ecosystems that we have and make a national innovation ecosystem, which by virtue of its breadth would have to have a virtual component. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to keep this brief. I'm going to try to keep this to 15 minutes so that hopefully so that we can have some Q&A, which is where I think it gets interesting. So with that, I will jump in. And the first thing I want to say is that innovation is a matter of national security. It's not just about kids in a garage or startups, venture capital. That's not all that innovation is about, even though that's what gets the predominance of the press attention to this, these days. Innovation is a matter of national security, and it's a matter of national security in two ways. One is that it's played an important role in our nation's ability to secure its own defense, and the other is it's played a significant role in our country's economic status in the world. On the first point, innovation played a significant role in our country's success in both of the world wars. So in World War I, innovation leading to the adoption, creation, manufacture of airplanes was very important to our victory in World War I, coupled with the communications innovations that our country came up with in conjunction with some of the other allies that kept us basically just a couple of steps ahead of the Nazis every step of the way. And that played a very important role in our victory in the First World War, comparably in the Second World War. Obviously, the atomic bomb helped our side win. So those are fairly clear examples of how innovation helps our national security by literally helping us win wars. But a less obvious and less well-known way innovation has helped us is help preserve the national security is by preserving our global economic leadership, which we still hold despite China's rise. We still hold that today. We're still the #1 economy in the world. And although other countries are catching up to us, the recent history is very favorable to America. That all the major innovations that have driven global economic strength are all made in the USA, at least in recent history after the world wars, and that includes the microprocessor, the semiconductor, communication, satellite, and the internet. These are all American innovations that not only were discovered here, but made their way out of the lab and into the private sector in a way that's created great wealth for America and driven exports. So innovation is important. It's not just about venture capital, and it's not just about kids in garages. Now, what is new, what's a new circumstance in the global economy is that our innovation leadership is under attack. Other countries have noticed the power that innovation has, that the significance it's played in American global dominance, both militarily and economically. And we're not the only game in town anymore. Taiwan made a top-down decision to go after the semiconductor industry, and to a large extent took it away from us. The Chinese now are making a big push in innovation. Their investment, the $3 billion investment in the Super Collider, I think is a very important, underreported fact. This is clearly the Chinese making an investment in being the leader in the physical sciences going forward. I think we should be very disappointed that our government passed on the opportunity to build one because they thought it was too expensive. Now you have China coming from being known simply as a violator of intellectual property to now making a significant patent push, and they have aspirations of being the global leader in patents shortly, even going out to American universities with their so-called billion-dollar fund to get American universities to play with them. This should also be concerning because these are decisions made by the Chinese government with a goal toward winning market share in innovation globally at our expense. So what you're seeing now more is state-driven decisions to dominate technology areas, and it's not just Taiwan, China, and so forth. There are many others, even from friendlies. Japan's decision to drop billions of dollars into robotics, lying as a country to dominate that space. Even the UK's recent decision to invest heavily in quantum computing. These are friendlies to us. So, although historically, or at least recent history, America's been the dominant player in innovation, what's going on now is not just a purely a market-driven thing where people come up with ideas and venture capitalists fund them. It's changed, and it's become more of a country versus country type activity. And I think it's an important question we need to ask ourselves as to whether the model that worked for America in the past is the model that will work in the future. So if you look at what drove American strength in innovation in the past, the drivers of American strength, first on the list, and it deserves its place as first on the list, is a massive government investment in innovation, defense primarily investment, and this is through universities and not through universities. It's what put Silicon Valley and Route 128 on the map. The entrepreneurs and the venture capitalists came second, but the starting point was the massive government investment in this. And then Silicon Valley, it should say Valley, sorry about that, Silicon Valley and Route 128 came in, and this was the private sector coming in and reaping economic benefit from the massive government investment in commercializing great R&D. That's how Silicon Valley and Route 128, meaning MIT, built up their reputation. But again, the question is whether the model and these drivers will sustain us in the future. So I mean, I would make the case, I won't make it now, but that the way that the American public and private sectors collaborated in the past were a very important reason why we won the Cold War, because the Russian government basically had to fund everything that they did. There was not a private sector that was putting money in for independent reasons. And in our country, our government has benefited from some innovations developed in the private sector and not just funded purely on the private side, on the public side. Now, in terms of some immediate challenges to our innovation position, you have a decreasing defense budget. And given as I would say that's top of the list and why our country has been the global leader in innovation, this should be of concern. Not pro-war. This is not advocating that the country be more active militarily. It's just pointing out that that budget is what's driven our innovation strength in the past. And all the big examples I gave before, including the internet, started with defense money. So the decreasing defense budget should be something that we're cognizant of. And another issue is the narrowing of venture capital spending, not so much in the sense that the total amount of total assets under management in venture capital are decreasing, because that's not true, but the areas of focus for venture capital are increasing domestically, and that's because venture capitalists are now spending more internationally, spending more outside of the States in their investment portfolios, but also the technology areas that they fund are much more narrow than they were even 15 years ago. And that's primarily because of where they're seeing the returns. It's sort of an unfortunate thing that the big venture capital returns in recent years have predominantly come out of technologies that are highly, highly frivolous, very, very lightweight technologies that are more about the way they're used than the quality of the technology itself. So, for example, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Googles are sort of the headline IPOs from the venture capital space in recent years. And all of these are sitting on top of technologies that are fairly trivial, that you don't need a PhD. They're not based on some breakthrough in computer science. They're fairly mundane things that many people could do, and they do not move the dial in American innovation leadership as such. Notably absent from the list of things that of big IPOs or big exits for venture capital are things in the physical sciences. None of these are in the physical sciences. And that's concerning because dominance in physical sciences is clearly important to our country's military future, and generally our future if we intend to lead the world in R&D and innovation. So what this points to is a divergence between technology that's important to our nation's military and economic future and technology that's attractive to venture capital. And there's a real divide there, and that's a very problematic trend for our country should that continue. Because that puts the important stuff back into the old USSR model, even though our country is capitalistic. So the good news, probably for reasons independent of those I'm talking about here, is that American universities are filling some of the leadership gap right now. And by the way, this is not intended as a thing on venture capital. It's just, this is what happens when you're focused on return. Getting a return is one thing. Defending the country's innovation future is another. In the past, they've coincided. They're just not coinciding now. But American universities have picked up a bigger role in innovation. The universities have always played a big role in R&D, but now are increasingly helping our country address the value of death problem. There's a market increase in incubators, accelerators, and so forth in university-based funds. I don't know off the top of my head, but I suspect that the total assets under management of university-specific funds is approaching $1 billion. It might even be more than that now. And the other thing is that new venture creation and startup activity is the trend is that is or will soon be the predominant form of tech transfer going forward. So in many of the schools that we've interviewed, it's 50% or higher view licensing into startups as their primary sort of tech transfer method, at least by measure of where they think they're going to get the returns. So, so universities are helping to bridge that gap between the venture capital gap between the, innovation that's important for a country's future and innovation that's getting funded by VC. Universities are stepping in that gap because the motive isn't purely getting venture return. It's also establishing a track record of the university in tech transfer. So, in terms of the state of the art in university innovation, I mean, Stanford and MIT are obviously the standouts. I'm an MIT person. I'm partial to MIT, and the entrepreneurial culture there changed my life. But in terms of the economic impact, I would say one of the examples that shifted some of the focus in tech transfer more in the direction of venture creation is obviously Google. At one point in time, Google accounted for a third of Stanford's endowment. The deal that the tech transfer office cut there was a big deal. So that and other similar successes, both at Stanford and MIT, helped affect the shift in university innovation efforts. But you still see that the successes, even at the great places, are focused on life sciences in areas generally that require smaller portfolios of IP. They're not in areas that require collaboration. It's still, a small set of patents where, a drug will come out of that, and you go out that and, create a multi-billion-dollar company, and that's that. The problem is that that's a fairly restricted area. So if you consider that most smartphones have, and this is I'm not an IP expert, but according to an IP expert I know at a prominent company, most smartphones have are associated with 1 million or more patents. So the question is, if you had those 1 million patents spread across a number of universities, would smartphone have ever happened at all? Would it have been possible to pool those into a single place so that we invented the smartphone that someone else didn't? So this is sort of a key challenge, and I asked the question, I don't know the answer, of how much more opportunity costs do we have this kind? I don't know, but I'd imagine the answer's got a lot of dollar signs next to it. So in terms of going forward, at least in the short term, the universities are filling an important gap and playing an important leadership role in the country's innovation future. And I think over the coming years, that'll be recognized more, and the more appropriate role, or a more accurate depiction of the role that venture capital plays, will also be coming into place shortly. But I think in terms of the next quantum leap we can make, the next opportunity to really take it to the next level, I think it's really going to involve not only better innovation activities at individual universities, and frankly, I think that's getting pretty good right now. I think the next level will be getting universities to collaborate to tap into untapped potential of innovation that's across universities. And in a new global innovation economy, I would say this is not only a nice to have, it's a need to have. It was okay the way we've done it over the past several decades. It served us fine when we were the only game in town. We're not the only game in town now. And the question is how we respond to that. So so the premise here is that we need a virtual national university innovation ecosystem. That silos of regional innovation excellence are not enough to maintain our global innovation leadership. As part of that, identifying and exploiting innovation synergy of assets that are geographically dispersed should be a priority. And before concluding, I'll point out that just as I argued that the unique public-private collaboration that our country had was a key driver to our winning the Cold War, or at least coming up with the innovations that helped us win the Cold War, there's a new game in town now, and this is state-driven capitalism and Chinese state-driven capitalism, and they're defining the boundaries a little bit differently. So that is a new model that we have to fight against, and in particular, a model where they will make decisions about where the private sector goes based on the national interests of the country. So in light of that, what is our country's response? And I'm simply arguing that if we do nothing, we may end up being in bad shape. And I think our loss of manufacturing is an example of that. The super collider loss is an example of that. So I think this is the case. This is something that's important and gives us a chance to do something better. And I'm glad to have some people on the phone here that are doing something about it. And all I'll say is our hope that our tool, iBridge, is something that helps universities collaborate more effectively, pool IP more collectively, lever assets that are geographically dispersed more effectively, although it would just be one piece of the solution. But for sure, I think the key takeaway from here that I'd like to leave you with is that it's a matter of national security that we develop a robust virtual national innovation ecosystem. So that's it, and thank you very much. And with that, I'll leave you with a screenshot of a live innovation challenge that we have on iBridge for a chemicals technology. Feel free to contact me or Tim any questions about that or anything else that I've spoken about. But I'll stop there here, Tim, and if there are questions, I guess this would be the time to field them.
Great. Yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate it. It's a good insight into sort of where we stand. It's sort of it's eye-opening and worrisome at the same time, So it's always good to kind of refocus and understand where we place ourselves and how we can move forward to better our our country's economy and as you said, a matter of national security. I do want to remind everyone that if you do have questions for John, please type it into the questions box within the control panel for GoToWebinar, and we will be sure to get to those. We do have a couple that have come in, John, so I'll start with the first one. Can you explain why a lack of collaboration across institutions of higher education is a missed opportunity for commercialization of U.S. intellectual property and R&D?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is that lack of collaboration means effectively that it's only things in the life sciences that will get monetized and that will bring back economic benefit to universities. So, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and so forth. There's that sort of thing. So the question is, what about other areas, and not just in physical sciences, but other areas like the smartphone or hard drives and so forth. So things where you need a larger IP portfolio to make a commercial push. Those are things that even the great universities right now are not getting return on. In photonics is another example. There are certain IP portfolios that they're short of critical mass. They're effectively valueless. So the only way to address that is to get universities collaborating better. And that means being able to pool the IP more effectively and more intelligently, but it also means being able to pool demand for IP more effectively. So we're seeing some efforts like that. I'm seeing some of those, but we get caught up in things like, what are the terms that people, sort of shared licensing arrangements and so forth. I mean, we get stuck there. But, I think basically if you go outside of certain high-stakes algorithms, life sciences and so forth, if you don't have collaboration, you really, really are placing a downward pressure on the value of those patents, and the net long-term effect, which we're starting to see already, is that R&D budgets will decline. It seems like there's less and less of an appetite on the part of our government to fund R&D for R&D's sake. So, people are getting called in, agencies are getting called in to justify some of the spending that they're doing. Absent more economic outcomes, job creation, startup creation, we should expect that lack of results in those parts of the IP portfolios that are right now not being monetized, and which can only be monetized by cross-university collaboration, will result in funding getting cut for those areas.
So kind of going off of that, what federal policy should be instituted to create more technology out of federally funded R&D? So maximizing what little may be out there in order to have the greatest impact.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes I think that the only way to get around some of the obstacles, of cross-university collaboration is to dictate from the federal government terms under which people would have to participate in a consortium. So, that if this is not, and it's a delicate balance here. You have a lot of people in the tech transfer field. They're generally really good at what they do, generally working miracles on short budgets. But when it comes to cross-university collaboration, that means you have to come up with new legal agreements, and it's complicated, right? Because every individual shop has their own best practices, their own legal agreements. They don't have infinite money to futz around with those agreements, right? Because it costs money to do that. So I think one area of policy that I think would be important would be to have rules in place to simplify cross-collaboration across universities from a legal perspective. It's, sort of joint licensing agreements kind of thing. That's one example, and maybe even coming up with shared revenue models for portfolios that are constructed across universities, so that's not another thing that universities have to negotiate. So I think anything that lowers the negotiating barrier and the legal barrier to cross-collaboration would be a positive, and it might be the kind of thing that only universities can do. I mean, unless the top 10 or 20 places said, "Hey, we're all doing it," then I guess maybe people would follow. But I think that's a role that maybe can only play by the federal government through policy.
Okay. Now, innovation systems exist between scholars, generally through their disciplinary professional networks. So, for example, biochemists connect through professional networks to other biochemists to share knowledge and research findings and so forth. Can you describe what a national ecosystem would do that isn't already facilitated by these professional networks, aside from maybe consultation on how to create shared IP or patent for researchers who are moving towards a similar product?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's two different things. I mean, I think the professional collaboration across researchers is probably fairly robust. I mean, that's done pretty well, but it has not contributed to shared IP portfolios. That's just the connection. I think it's an interesting question because it's true there is that collaboration at a research level, but it certainly does not exist on the IP portfolio creation level, and certainly not on the licensing level. And that might be that as part of researchers' professional concern, they're curious and they want to learn what their collaborators are doing because it helps them do their job better. And their job is effectively to publish. I mean, you become distinguished as an academic if you publish more. You may or may not become distinguished as an academic if you create IP that's licensed. You get rich, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're great in your field. So I don't think collaborative research is translating into collaborative commercialization. Not I don't think. I mean, it's obvious that that's not happening. And one reason for that is the lack of alignment with professional goals of the collaborators. Collaborators benefit from collaboration from a research perspective and may or may not benefit from that on an IP licensing perspective. And maybe some of the policy changes that I was talking about a moment ago that one of the callers asked about, maybe that would change that dynamic.
Should patents be a reimbursable part of a research contract and more applied research as part of a basic research contract?
Tim, can you? I didn't quite get that question.
Sure. Should patents be a reimbursable part of a research contract and more applied research as part of a basic research contract?
Applied research. I might have missed the point of this question, but if the in terms of whether research should be more applied or not, I don't know the answer to that question. It might be that the mix of applied versus not applied, if theoretical is just fine. It's just that we don't get enough out of the applied research that we do. I don't have a lot of insight on that. I mean, the only thing I would say, when I was in graduate school, some of the work that I did in logic was considered theoretical, and then along came Google and search engines, and then suddenly that became applied. So I don't know how germane that is from a distinction that is from a commercialization standpoint. I didn't, because I don't know what the reimbursable term. I don't know what's meant by reimbursable. I can't answer the first part of the question.
All right, well, maybe we can follow up afterwards with some additional insight to that. What role do prize challenges offer, if any, to seeding and nurturing an innovation ecosystem?
I suspect it's an overrated role. I mean, it played an important part, say, in the creation of the MIT innovation ecosystem. I remember the early days of the entrepreneurship competition, the way that mobilized students to think commercially about their ideas and brought researchers together and so forth. But I would also point out that I think worked at MIT because there was such a robust IP base, research and development base to begin with, that the entrepreneurship competition was a nice cherry on top. I think in terms of as something that would mobilize an innovation ecosystem in the first place, I don't think that prizes on their own without a rich base to work off would be that effective. And in particular, some of the, if you look at X Prize and some of that, where they say that, they've gotten more from the prize dollars that, they've given out than the federal government has. So I think in the robotics competition they claimed that they had more impact with their $10 million prize than the federal government had with their, whatever it was, $20 billion of research. I mean, I think that's a completely preposterous statement. There would be no entrance in these competitions, these robotics competitions, if there wasn't funding from the federal government to do R&D in the first place. Full stop. Just wouldn't happen. So I think it's a good piece of an innovation ecosystem. I think it's an important piece, but it doesn't replace. It's not a replacement for R&D, IP development. It might be a way to cultivate entrepreneurs or bring them out of the woodwork or to encourage collaboration. The other thing I'd say is that a prize that was across universities might be a very good way to promote virtual interaction.
Great. Now, what about protectionist attitudes that exist within existing university systems? How do you overcome those to properly incent greater collaborative efforts amongst universities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I wish I knew the answer to it. I think one of the earlier first question or second question I got, there was a very, very smart question about what the feds can do. It might be that the feds would have to come in and realign people's interests so that people viewed it as part of their core responsibility or part of their core job metrics to do a good job collaborating. And I don't necessarily blame individual shops for having a protectionist attitude because, frankly, to date, because of Bayh-Dole, you own what you own and you get paid based on what of that you monetize. So I think it's sort of an unintended consequence of Bayh-Dole, and I think Bayh-Dole anticipated this collaborative problem. That all I can say is that we're working on that problem. We don't have a solution. I think that would be the solution to that is something that would have to be done in conjunction with some of the people on this call and universities generally. But yeah, it's one thing for a university to say, hey, I have something great and I don't want to market it, online or in conjunction with other people because I think I can do that. I think the issue is really what happens with the remaining 99% of the portfolio. There the protectionism really manifests as, nothing happening at all, not because people don't want it to happen, but because they don't have infinite budgets, generally at tech transfer offices. So great question. I don't have an answer, but hopefully we'll figure out how to solve it together.
That's great. Now what would you say are some lessons that can be incorporated from the Chinese state model into our market-driven model?
That's a really, really smart, great question. That's a smart and great question. And, in some ways I'd say that the jury's out on that, in part because I don't have a lot of good examples where China really has innovated with great success. The success to date really is a lot more about stealing IP, infringing on IP, knockoffs, just doing, assuming that we're ahead and trying to copy us. That said, it would be a blunder of colossal proportions and potentially fatal proportions, from the standpoint of our global leadership, if we assume that would happen, that's going to continue happening going forward. If we, when people say things like innovations in our blood and it's not in the Chinese blood, it's just patently stupid and patently and very dangerous. I don't know, but one of the things that I hope we are doing, that someone in our federal government is doing, is, because some of this stuff you can find online, and some of it I think is probably not publicly available, but, the Chinese government is coming up with 10, 20, 30-year plans where they figure out what areas of technology they want to dominate. And I don't know that we want to make sure they don't dominate those areas. I'm not even saying that method is correct. But what I do believe is that if we don't pay attention to what they're doing and have some discussion as a country about how to respond to that, then we should expect that at some point we'll be left with what they don't want. A private company, even a public company, a big, powerful public company, cannot compete against a foreign country that's prepared to subsidize losses for a decade or 2 decades to win a space. And I think if you look at what's happened to some U.S. companies, and I would say Kodak or Xerox or some companies, it is entirely plausible to me, I don't have the evidence to support this, but it's entirely plausible to me that they were victims of effectively state on corporate attack. They said, we want to own, China wants to own, or Taiwan or whoever it is, we want to own parts of the supply chain. So I think just, I don't know the answer to the question, but I would say step one is don't be complacent that just because we have Silicon Valley and Route 128 and Stanford and MIT that we will continue to dominate the innovation scene going forward. And step number 2 is we shouldn't be so arrogant as not to pay attention to what Chinese are doing, because I don't know if the folks that in our government that voted against spending the $3 billion to build a super collider were even aware that China was doing what they're doing. So don't know the answer, but I do think at the very least we need to start getting smart as a country and paying attention to these issues. I mean, I find Donald Trump as entertaining as anyone else, but I find it flabbergasting that no one's talking about what China's doing in the South Sea, for example. I mean, relative to where our country stands in the future, you'd think that would get more play.
Now, this is a three-part question, John. What role do you see these three groups playing within a virtual innovation ecosystem? Number one, non-research institutions. So those are institutions that may be, community colleges or private liberal arts colleges, other non-research institutions. Second group is startups, and then the third group is entrepreneurs. Can you describe what role you see each of those playing in a virtual innovation ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Well, the entrepreneurs, I think, will be the leaders of it, because at the end of the day, it is about the entrepreneurs, it's about the human capital. And one thing that our country is not short on intellectual property and R&D. There's no scarcity of that. There's probably more scarcity of entrepreneurs than there are of those other two areas. And so I think entrepreneurs are very important. And hopefully entrepreneurs that want to create wealth and want to change the world, and hopefully also want to do it in a way that benefits our country, sort of an entrepreneurial patriotism. And one way that could manifest is, for example, helping our military, helping defense get more startup and entrepreneurial participation, so their IP, so they can benefit from outside innovation in the same ways that we did historically, where that happened historically, and where we won against the Cold War against Russia, in part of that, because of that, in part. Startups will play their role, but the thing is that startups are really the startup climate is really, these days, the way it's panning out, it's basically driven by what VCs want to fund and what investment banks want to take out. So I think startups they're an engine, and they are the entrepreneurs, and the startups are the engine of our innovation economy. And I think they'll continue to do that. But the question is how we get that overlay of our national interest, helping to guide them a little bit so their efforts are pointed in the right direction. In terms of non-research organizations, that's kind of an interesting question. And I think I want to recouch that question in terms of why innovation matters to workforce in general. Is innovation a workforce issue? And I had the good benefit of having a luminary in the workforce space and a mentor of mine, Emily DeRocco, asked me that question once. And the answer I gave is that innovation is what defines the workforce needs of tomorrow. So, it's great if we come up with the R&D. It's great if we find an entrepreneur to create a startup to commercialize that R&D and to get a company going. But from a workforce standpoint and the involvement of American citizens, it's also important that those startups hire Americans as they scale. The cleanest example of that would be in manufacturing, right? So we have this trend that's been going on for a couple of decades now, where something's invented here and it's manufactured elsewhere. It's manufactured in China. So there, you might make the case that we might even be funding our own economic decline. We might be expediting our economic decline. So I think a better mechanism of tapping into the non-research community, the non-entrepreneur community, and tapping them into the activities of startups, scaling startups, or even university startups that don't have venture capital. I think that's an important role, and generally better alignment between innovation activities and workforce training.
Okay, great. In the interest of time, I want to tackle kind of two questions at once again. So the first is models of the kind of work that more internally, so providing process or mechanisms to begin the shift within a university's culture. And then the other part, in a sense, is how do you propose a virtual university innovation ecosystem be initiated, and how would it function? So that's a little bit more internal as well, but also collaborative. Do you have an example of a good type of construct existing of a virtual university innovation ecosystem somewhere in the US, possibly at a small scale, which might include a few partnering universities? So both internally changing the culture and then externally a model that might be, an existing collaboration.
I'm going to start with the latter a little bit, but I don't think there's a great. I don't think the market is yet at a point where we can say here are best practices, and it's just a matter of following what everyone else is doing. I don't think we're mature enough to that point, and I also think there are structural reasons for that. I think, unless, without some kind of government intervention or some kind of intervention or some active leadership across several universities, I think it's very hard for this sort of thing to happen. I mean, you have little examples, like you have some of these interesting research centers set up by the government where IP is supposed to be shared across the centers and it's multi-university. But the truth is that the IP issues are not resolved in those. There isn't a clear guideline, and I think that's the reason why you don't see as much tech transfer. So I will tell you, from our standpoint, one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to aggregate some demand on iBridge for IP and publish it across universities and see whether at a small scale we can play the role of intermediary in trying to pool IP together. Now this is this tiny little activity, and it's, for example, this innovation challenge that we have with a Fortune 500 chemicals company, and they've told us some of the things that they're looking for. We like chemicals because it's not very startup friendly these days. There aren't a lot of VCs looking to start chemicals companies. So that's really, if you're going to monetize that, you're probably going to do it by licensing the IP. So we're trying to learn about some of the issues that this last question is about by trying it a bit on our own. Can we get multiple universities engaged in this challenge? Do they have thermostat resins that they'd like to license? We're pretty confident that we won't be able to license them one at a time, or not lucratively, or help universities do that. But if we can get a pool together, we might be able to. So that's something that we're trying to do. But I don't think there are best practices to point to in terms of affecting culture change. I'm even less familiar with a clear example of that. I mean, I can tell you that I suspect, even though I'm advocating for a public role, I think I was at MIT at a very interesting time when it was before MIT was MIT. At least MIT entrepreneurship was what it is now. And all I'll say is that it was a lot more about, lots of little things happening at once as opposed to a top-down orchestrated effort. So I'm even less of a position to say how you would affect culture change at a university to do this. But I do think it would be primarily on the research faculty and certainly on the commercialization side. It's not just about training faculty. It's about what happens after the faculty want to do something with their IP.
And perhaps even, through or via the external collaboration, you can find best practices to start to, shift a more engaged collaboration discussion internally within the university, correct?
I think that's right, yeah.
Great.
That's right.
Yeah, so for the interest of time, I want to wrap things up. There are a few more questions, and I'm going to send those on to John and ask him to follow up with anyone that has asked a question individually, if that's okay, John. And then you guys can continue that dialogue offline. But I do want to thank John and the iBridge Network and Innovation Accelerator for not only the discussion today and leading our webinar, but also for your continued support of UEDA. We really appreciate it, and thank you all for being here, for tuning in. And John, thanks for your engagement as well.
Well, thank you, Tim, and everyone who joined in and tolerated listening to me for whatever it was, 20 minutes there. I thank you very much, and would very much like, if there are any questions you have, we don't have all the answers, and even if we did, it wouldn't matter very much, because it's about getting the participation of people like you. So please do reach out, go to ibridgenetwork.org, tell us what you think. And if you're interested or you have ideas on how to collaborate or how to solve some of these problems, we're all ears.
That's
Thank
great.
you very much for the time.
That's great. Thanks, John. Yeah, and we will follow up with an email to everyone with a link to the archive once that's available online. So again, appreciate everyone's attendance today. For more information about the University Economic Development Association, visit universityeda.org. And until next time, thanks and have a great day.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John.